cool. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, no, that was really cool. Thanks, April.
You're welcome, guys.
So next up, we have Dean, who is going to give us some interesting stuff on Intune and 365.
Yes, I'm struggling with my screen sharing at the moment, so I'm going to try and get the file into Teams. So bear with me a few moments. It's got a couple of pictures in this slide deck, so it's just uploading nice and slowly. It's I've actually, thanks John, I've actually switched to the BT line for stability. I'm not sure how my how well
you
my
might
camera's
want to go
doing
back
right
to
now,
Starlink. I think's the answer to that question.
It was just uploading quite a lot on a really small line, which is why I've got Starlink. I would love to have Virgin Media, but they don't have it in my area, so which is why I had to go for the space internet. Good. Okay, so hopefully, now the thing about having a large slide deck is that it takes a long time to upload and also takes a long time to download. So if you can let me know when you can see the slides.
I can see it on my screen.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Cool. Take it away, Dean.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this talk is about strengthening endpoint security, but really it's mainly about two features of Intune and Azure AD that I want to really talk about more than I do in my YouTube channel. When I've done a couple of talks on these features on YouTube, and the way I do these videos is to keep them very short and very snappy and less than 10 minutes where I can, mainly because I don't have a lot of time, but also the audience doesn't typically watch for longer than a few minutes at a time on YouTube. So having a 20, 30, 40-minute video just isn't worth it. So typically I don't get to go into as much depth as I'd like to, and I gloss over some of the interesting parts. And I really think these features do need a bit more attention. And so I thought I'd do that today. And I think also, even if you don't really care about some of the Intune features that I'm going to talk about, I think it's interesting the amount of thought and effort that's been put into these features, and we'll go into each of why I think that in just a moment. So I'm Dean. Probably should start with that. I'm Enterprise Ability and Security MVP for now. We'll see how long that lasts, because maintaining two MVPs is, I expect, is going to be quite hard. And I've been working with endpoint and security for a long time. I'd say more than 13, 14 years now, and doing YouTube and stuff for a couple of years as well. So today I'm going to just explain a little bit about the things that keep CISOs and CEOs and security officers up at night. And so a couple of examples there. That's an example of a CISO according to Midjourney, if you put a particular prompt in. Things like malware, phishing attacks, zero-day exploits, ransomware attacks, insider threats, and data breaches are just a few examples according to ChatGPT. And those are the things that keep CISOs up at night. And all of these are made significantly worse if the attacker has oh, just realized I can't see the chat. Look, a picture of a kitten. They're made significantly worse if the attacker has simple and easy access to local admin. And so this really is about how we can manage local admin and limit the prevalence of a local admin across a Windows workstation estate. So if we think about users, and you can see exactly how many slides I've got, but I'll get through them quite quickly and move into a demo really quickly, so don't worry. If we think about users, a typical user looks a little bit like that, and they will just want to be able to do their job. And some apps require them to be admin in order to run or install that application. And so users want to be admin. Now, your typical administrator might look like that. They know that users with admin level permissions cause wider, more devastating security incidents on average. And admins don't generally want users installing their own apps on their computers. They want to control that. That's why they've invested in something like Intune or an MDM. And so admins don't want users to have local admin. So if we think about the solution then, if you're limited to Microsoft native tools, and for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to assume you are limited to Microsoft native tools, and a lot of organizations are, so it's not that wild a theory, then the answer is pretty much to give users elevated privileges or to give users local admin accounts. Now, when we say elevated privileges, we can put them in the local administrators group with their standard user account. And so when they go to run an application that needs admin, they can simply choose run as administrator and it will run as administrator. The other option is to give them a local admin account. So when I say local, I mean an account that isn't managed by the domain or Azure AD. It's just on the device itself, and then they can use that. And that's probably a better way to do it. But then you don't have visibility on that. So really, I wouldn't want to think about that too much. So luckily, what we've got with the new features that have come out in Intune recently is two things that kind of solve those two options, solve for those two challenges that we've got. The first one is Intune Endpoint Privilege Manager, and the other one is, its full name is Microsoft Entra Azure AD Windows Local Admin Password Solution, and we're going to call it Windows Laps for the rest of this talk. So that's good. They've got a solution for this. And the first one we're going to talk about is Intune Endpoint Privilege Manager. So, one second. I mentioned at the start that if you are interested in asking a question, please do just interrupt me. Oh, look, a question. If you have a central lap service, how does the new local service integrate with that or not? Good question. Yeah, so Windows Laps is the new iteration of an existing solution that's called the Local Admin Password Solution for Windows Server AD. And there's many organizations who already use that for good reason, because it's a fantastic idea. If you already have that, then enabling essentially the features that are rolled out with Windows Laps are being enabled on every Windows device, and they will respect the existing solution being there. If you don't configure the new solution. I think that's right, but I might need to check when we get to that bit. Anyway, so if you have any questions, please do ask like that. Thank you, Aaron. And there will be the prize that Imran mentioned at the start is a Pluralsight trial code, or 2 or 3, depending on how many questions we get. So if you'd like to grab that, then please do ask a question during this. So where was I? Endpoint Privilege Manager. Right, so there's two ways that Endpoint Privilege Manager can get involved in a Windows session. So assume we've done all the config, which I'll show you in a bit. The two ways are that the user selects Run with Elevated Access. You'll notice that there's also a button just above that, 4 above that, 3 above that, which says Run as Administrator. That's not going to be removed. That's going to persist and stay there for very good reason, because it does a very good job at doing exactly what it's there for. It's recommended that you disable that and automatically deny that for your standard users once you've got Endpoint Privilege Manager up and running in your organization, but it should stay there for admins to do their job. So when an admin needs to run as administrator without using EPM, then they would use that. So that's method 1. The user says, I want to run this application as admin. Method 2 is that it is detected by an attribute such as file hash or the publisher certificate or similar, but we'll talk about that in a bit as well. Okay, so I've been having a problem with my demo as well. This has not been a good run up to a talk, but we're going to go to the demo. So I'll just try and share my screen. I think it's this one. And now that I think about it, I might have an issue resharing the slides after I'm done, but never mind. I'm sure we'll get through it. Okay, so any questions on oh, there are some questions. So got the RFC for Windows Labs to push out Intune. Good timing, good. We'll come on to that in a minute. Will this work the same on-prem and remote? Endpoint Privilege Manager, yes. Yeah, it works over Azure AD. Yeah, so that's fine. And the pictures are from Midjourney. I've paid for it, so I'm allowed to use them for well, I'm allowed to use them. So yeah, they're pretty good. And I use them for all of my YouTube thumbnails as well. And actually, the majority of these are ones that I've not chosen to use for the YouTube thumbnails, so they're already pre-made. Okay, so I mentioned that it was called Microsoft and did I? Anyway, Microsoft are trying to get people to use the Microsoft Entra portal rather than the Azure AD portal. I must admit, I'm not 100% certain why yet. There might be a reason. If someone does know why, then please do let me know. Anyway, if you go to the Entra portal, you get to click on Azure Active Directory and get to a very similar screen that you would have done if you'd gone to Azure AD. Anyway, from here, you can go to all devices, device settings, and then head down in this pane to enable Azure AD local admin password solution. You need to do that, or it doesn't work. And it definitely doesn't work because I recorded a whole YouTube video, got to the end and it didn't work because I hadn't enabled that and then had to squeeze in this bit at the start. Thankfully, editing exists. So tick that. It does enable it pretty quickly once you've done that. I've gone to the wrong topic, haven't I? I have gone to the wrong topic. The question about laps threw me. Don't worry about that for now. We're going to talk about Endpoint Privilege Manager first. My bad. So with Endpoint Privilege Manager, it's already there's nothing in Azure AD to enable, so that's not a problem. We can go straight to the Intune portal, which is endpoint.microsoft.com or intune.microsoft.com, and from here we. I was going to say it's already enabled in your tenant, and then I saw this just as I was preparing for this talk. If we go to endpoint security and then down to endpoint privilege management, you get this nice little banner, which appeared either today or very, very recently, which says EPM is now generally available, because up until now it was in private preview, which means that in order to use it, you need a trial or a license. Now, I think I might have a trial license existing at the moment, which is why it's still working for me. But generally, you do need a license in order to get this working. So this is where you configure it all. Thanks, April. Okay, so this is where you configure it all. And we will start by configuring a policy. Now, there are two main policies that we have available to us. We have, if I just choose this, you have the elevation rules policy and the elevation settings policy. You need an elevation settings policy first. So we'll go there first and we'll start creating one. Now, I mentioned that I'm going to give it a name, but give me a second. And these are the bits that I cut out of YouTube where I've got to do things like that so it doesn't show all the past history in the name field and give away some personal details. So settings policy, we will choose next. And here you can see that it's automatically set to enabled. And these are set by default when you go to enable this. So we do need to enable this feature in order for it to do things, because it actually deploys an agent out to your endpoints. It will deploy, it's only a few meg, but it actually installs something on each endpoint that gets targeted by this policy. So the cool thing, though, is that if you were to deploy a policy that disables this on your endpoints, it actually does get disabled on your endpoints and does get removed, which is different from some of the other things that get pushed out when you deploy them via Intune. So disabling it will remove it from the endpoints, not immediately though. And this is where I say they've put a lot of thought into creating this feature. It doesn't just immediately get rid of it; it puts it on hold or disables it on the endpoint for 7 days, and then after 7 days, if it's still disabled, it'll get actually removed from the endpoint, which protects you in a case where someone accidentally pushes a policy out to all your endpoints and disables it. You wouldn't want that mass removal to happen immediately on all your endpoints. So we enable it. And then we've got send elevation data for reporting. This originally in the public preview, or even a little while ago, said send elevation data to Microsoft or MS. And a lot of people, for various reasons, said no at that stage. So they don't want to send information that they don't need to send to Microsoft. And then they've changed the wording for good reason, where it says send elevation data for reporting, because you're not sending it to Microsoft, you're sending it to your tenant. So you're sending it from endpoints to your tenant so that Microsoft can help you with some of the reporting features that we'll talk about in a moment. So if we say yes, we'll send data to Microsoft, we then get to say how much data, and not just arbitrarily how much data do you want to send. It's based on the outcome that you want from the reporting side. So that's where a reporting scope comes in. You can see that we've got three options. We have diagnostic data only, which is where Microsoft will use it internally to determine whether the feature is working correctly. It's just diagnostic data. There's nothing personally identifiable in that at all. And then we have the other two. So we've got diagnostic data and managed elevations, and diagnostic data and all endpoint elevations. Now, the first one doesn't really make sense from a wording perspective for me. Don't know if they're going to change it now. It's GA, but it's a little bit confusing because it actually means any elevation that is conducted or helped or managed, maybe, by endpoint privilege management, as opposed to all, which is any elevation on the device from any method. So that could be someone choosing run as admin on their on the context menu rather than run with elevated access, which is the alternative in EPM. So this, if you were to set this, which probably is what you should set for various reasons, this will help you with your migration to this feature, because you will be able to get a report which says who has elevated what during a normal workday on their device. So you'd be able to see what applications are being elevated, and also which child processes are elevated from that as well. So it's very, very useful for when you're doing a migration to this kind of feature. So if we assume that we're doing that, we then have the default elevation response. And default elevation response is essentially what happens when the user right-clicks on the application they want to run and chooses run with elevated access. Does it deny all requests, or does it require user confirmation? So if it's deny all requests, unless there's a rule matched, which we'll talk about in a moment, unless there's a rule which specifically matches that application, then it would deny, which means that it just pops up saying your administrators don't allow you to run this application with elevated access, and you get a continue button. Or you could require user confirmation, which then gives us some validation options. So you don't need to select a validation option. You could just set it as it is, and then it would give the user the option to continue or cancel with that elevation. Or you could ask them for a business justification, in which case they get to type in why they want to elevate it. It doesn't send it to anyone for approval. It does send it to the portal so you can report on it and so you can view it, but it doesn't, in this stage, request approval from anyone. And also, you could request Windows authentication. So Windows authentication is any way that Windows will be able to authenticate that the user is the right user for this device. Things like Windows Hello for Business, password prompt, all that kind of stuff. Any way that the user can be verified as being the right person. So I guess that's a way of ensuring someone hasn't just jumped onto the device from a that isn't that user and trying to run something as admin. And for what it's worth, you can select both there. As you can see, that's they're checkboxes, so you can select both, requesting business justification and proof that it's the right person. So once we've got these, it's a standard workflow. You just set the scope tags, set the assignments, and then it's all done. So I've already got that deployed to my devices, this one here, this elevation settings policy, and I think it is set in exactly the same way that I've just done it, all and require user confirmation with no validation. Okay, so when we go into a machine, you'll see that. Okay, a question from David. Just to check, EPM is just for hybrid Azure AD Intune devices only, doesn't work with co-managed. I believe it does work with co-managed. I think it does, because any device that is managed by Intune can. Yeah, I think it does, but obviously don't. I'm obviously not 100% certain, but I think it does. Okay, good. Well, let's just quickly jump in and take a look at it in action. So if we, for example, which one have I not elevated with the rule? 1 second. 7 different PowerShell aren't good to test with. So we'll right click, and from here in the Windows 10 version of the operating system, there's a little button here which says run with elevated access. For some reason, it's not in Windows 11 yet. It's in this show more options thing. So you have a couple of extra clicks, but you get to run with elevated access. And you can see it says, do you want to open this app as administrator? And you get continue or cancel because we require user confirmation. And then they get to choose continue, but we aren't asking them to provide a business justification, and we aren't asking them to verify it's definitely them in this case. If I was to have set this to set a settings policy to, where is it? To require validation, then you would see that ask at that stage. So for now, I'm going to choose continue, and it runs it as admin. There isn't a great way for me to show you that it's running as admin from here, but that is running as admin. Trust me. So if we take a look at rules then, any questions while we are at this stage? So if we look at rules, I'm going to create a policy and choose a profile, which is elevation rules, and choose create. Now here, Firefox, for example, choose next. And so here, this interface is not incredibly easy to understand at first. You have essentially, you can make this is a table of elevation rules. You can click add, and another one appears, which I don't want to do, so I'll remove that. And then we have a rule name and edit instance. So this isn't clickable. You have to go into edit instance, and then you can give it the rule name. So I'm going to call it Firefox and give it a description. You should obviously give it a description. And then we have these conditions. So the elevation type you can see we've got the option of user confirmed or automatic. If it's set to user confirmed, it pretty much follows the same workflow that you just saw when I chose run with elevated access, because it will ask the user to verify that they want to run that as admin, even without them having to choose that button. So it will just say, do you want to run this as admin? And then also you could ask for business justification in exactly the same way, to the same workflow at the back end doing all of this. So we can choose business justification, for example, and then they'll be asked. And if we scroll down, you can see we need to determine which application we're going to be using. So for example, the file name, I'm going to assume it's firefox.exe. I could be wrong. We'll find out in a minute. And then also the file path. So these are two fields that you could use, but you'll notice that they're not the only ones that we don't even need them at all, to be honest. You've got certificate there and certificate type, and these are the ones that you need in order to be able to run this, to detect an application. And the reason for that is that it would be very easy, dangerous for for an admin to do something like that. And forget to type in a file name, and then you've got every application on the C drive being automatically elevated as admin, which would be terrifying. So for good reason, they've made it impossible for you to just specify with just the file path itself. And as I say, you don't actually need it at all. So when we say, how do we determine which application, we can use a signature from mine's gone blank, a signature from the certificate that signed the application itself. And so we can either get that from reusable settings, which I'm not going to show you just now, but we can also upload a cert from the endpoint, and then it will convert that into base64. So I'll show you how to get that cert, because it might not be too easy to think that through. So bear with me a second while I find an application. So let's take Firefox, for example. And from here, go into properties, we've got digital signatures, and you can see that it's been signed by Mozilla Corporation. And if we go in and view the cert, we will have a chain of certificates. So you can see that Mozilla Corporation has signed this, and it's also the certificate chain is also has DigiCert SHA-2 and then the DigiCert root. So it's recommended that you use the publisher cert in order to determine the application. So for example, if we copy this to file, then we get the export wizard and it will give us the file itself. Various reasons I'm using virtual machines nested in remote desktop, so it's quite difficult for me to get that into the portal. So I'm not going to do that right now, but that would work. So you create that serve file and then stick it in your portal. Now you'll notice that this was the publisher cert, so that would mean that any application signed by Mozilla would automatically offer the user to elevate. So that's where we can combine that with the file name, perhaps the file path, to make sure it's just Firefox, unless you do want all Mozilla applications to be Mozilla signed applications to be elevated. We also have this down here. So once you put the file in there, you get to choose whether it's the publisher or a certificate authority in the chain. So I showed you there the chain of certs there. This exact example is not a very good reason to use the certificate authority chain. This would be a very bad one to use. For example, same with DigiCert, it would be even worse, because these are going to be signing many applications around the world. So using those would definitely mean that you're exposed to a lot of applications being automatically launched as admin. So don't do that. But it is possible, say, if you're signing applications from a building applications yourself in-house, you might have a reason to use a certificate authority instead. Okay. So, excuse me, I've got a cold. So we could do that. That's one way to do it, and it works. It's a very good way. It's all obviously the default way, so we can do that. Alternatively, you could say, actually, I don't want to use a signature source, in which case it pretty much changes the whole interface, as you can see, and gives you a different set of things that you need. So, for example, here again, we could say Firefox.exe as the name. You can give a file path. We're not using a signature source. In that case, we need to use a file hash. Again, for the same reason as before, we don't want anyone to be able to just tap in a file path and file name, because they could unwittingly expose themselves to launching more applications than they expected. The file hash will obviously only identify one particular file. So we get the file hash. It's very simple to get the file hash. Funnily enough, the PowerShell command is get-file hash. Which is just this one here. So the other thing to mention about EPM is that the guidance and documentation is really, really well written and really well organized, so you can very quickly understand exactly how to use this tool. For a long time, there was no documentation on this feature while we were looking at it in private preview and stuff, but this is now very, very well documented. So take a look at the documentation if you are rolling this out. So when we get a file hash, can I get a file hash, do you think? Will that actually work? Probably not. Again, this is the bit I normally cut from YouTube. I do need, especially when I make a mistake, I cut that as well. But I'm using a Mac keyboard.
Like we're seeing the behind the scenes of YouTube, Dean.
Behind, not quite, just the edits. I could release my edits are normally longer than the video itself. So yeah.
My edits
Right,
have
so
a lot of swearing in, so if mine ever get released, I'll be in trouble.
yeah. So get-file hash. And I assume it's something like that. And then we have the file hash in SHA-256. So if I grab that and somehow get it back to the portal, no. Yeah, so I didn't expect that to work because VMs are awful. And unfortunately, I can't run this in enhanced mode. I know that's the right way to do it, but when it doesn't let me, it doesn't work. So, okay, I can't get that, but you can imagine if I was able to, then it would be very simple just to tap that in there, and then that field will be complete. View, no. So that's how you create a rule. And so this information, you can see it's quite easy to get a file hash. It's quite easy to get a cert. They are working, I'm sure, on a way to make this easier for you to get information into these fields. There is one other way that I'll show you in just a moment, but they are working on a way to make it much easier, like a few clicks, without needing to copy stuff over from workstations. So if I just jump over to reporting then. And we'll look at the reports that are available. If we take a look at the elevation report, this will show you all elevations that have happened in the environment, regardless of whether they were managed by EPM. If I choose that, you can see that we have some elevations that have taken place there. I don't know what the result failed is, because they all have worked. I'll need to try and understand why it's reporting that. But you can see that the reports we get are really quite rich. We have the user who elevated, the client that did it on, the file name that they elevated, 7-zip in this case, the publisher, whether it was user confirmed or automated, and the date and time that it happened, and the result apparently. When we choose the file name, we get this additional detail around the file itself, and you can see it gives you the file path, file hash. So we could, without having to do get dash file hash, we can just take the hash value from the report. And that's where I say it's very easy to use these reports. Sending that data to Microsoft for reporting means that you can migrate to this feature quite easily, because if you take a look at what people are elevating day to day, then you can very quickly use Graph to grab this hash file and put it into a new rule for you to roll out to your endpoints. I will say that this isn't working exactly as I expected it to, because I expected a few more to be available in this list. But I haven't really been using this for the past week, so maybe it's a bit broken. And yeah, it's the exact same ones in the managed elevation, even though I have been testing run as admin. So something's not quite right there, but never mind. Okay, any other questions? Okay. So I want to go back to slides, but I've got a feeling if I try to do that, it will make me upload them all again, and that seems like a waste of time for just one or two slides. So I'm going to just share this screen, I think. Yeah, I'll just share this screen. Just talk amongst yourselves while I sort my talk out. Okay. Hopefully you can see that, which looks like a very standard PowerPoint window. Everyone got that?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so this was the way I introduced Endpoint Privilege Manager. Next, local admin accounts. So if we take a look at the options around Windows local admin password solution, we get to see some of the options that or some of the benefits that you get when you are using the local admin password solution. As I mentioned to Alan earlier on, it's the advancement of the existing solution that is for Windows Server AD. And this one provides a unique, complex password for a single local account on each device that it's targeted at. It can detect the built-in local admin using the well-known SID, so you don't need to specify the name if you don't know it. And yeah, it can rotate the password on a schedule. It can rotate the password after use, and it can also log out and reboot the device after use. And I think you'll agree that those features are a pretty good feature set for managing local admins. That's typically the things that you want to be able to do to make sure that passwords are secure. And whenever someone uses a password, then they can't use it again. For example, that might be something you want to do. So to the demo. Probably didn't need that slide, but I had it lying around, so there we are. Just sharing my screen again, bear with me. You'd think I'd be better at doing this kind of thing, given the amount of time I do it, but, you know. Okay, hopefully you can see the Intune Admin Center again. Thumbs up. So I mentioned, as I was talking about the Enter Admin Center, I couldn't wait to get started on the Enter Admin Center. You can enable this feature from the Enter Admin Center. One thing I didn't talk about on EPM was licensing, because it's a really annoying topic. And so I'm not going to mention licensing unless someone asks a question about it. So the thing I will say, though, is that I can see two people typing. The thing I will say, though, is that this feature doesn't, thanks, John, require any additional licensing on top of your Windows licensing. So local admin password solution is built in and free and native to Windows now. So we just need to enable it from the Enter Admin Center or from the Azure AD Admin Center. So as you can see here, I have done that. Enable Azure AD local admin password solution lapse. And that means it's enabled, and then we can go and start configuring it. So we do that from Intune. So we head back over to Intune. Mine's gone completely. Yeah, we go back to Intune, and there's so many different places that they hide these settings, but I have just remembered exactly where it is. And we go into Endpoint Security, and from here we choose Account Protection. I'm hoping it says Cloud Lapse. There it is. We can then create a policy from here and choose Windows 10 and later, and we choose Windows Lapse. So from here we'll choose Create, and it's Windows Lapse, not Cloud Lapse. That's what we were all calling it before we knew what it was going to be called. And these are the options you get. I didn't mention backup to Azure AD, but you can do that, and you can also back it up to AD as well. So let's say, for example, you want to back that password up to Azure AD. You can also set the maximum age of the password itself. I'm not going to configure that for now. And then we get to choose the administrator account name. Now, it'd be very simple to take configured and then say something like my local admin here, and that could be the name of the local admin that you want on that device. Now, that's not what this field is for. It's not you saying what the admin account you want to be called. That didn't make any sense. It's not you choosing the name for the local admin account on the device. It's the name of the local admin account that already exists on the device. This isn't you creating an account. This is you choosing an account. So then in this case, there would need to be an account called my local admin, which was a local admin on the device in order for it to be managed by this. Now, if you choose not configured, then it will automatically detect and choose the well-known local admin account, the one that's disabled by default, and manage that instead. Anything you need to do with that account, such as rename it or enable it and all that kind of stuff, needs to be done separately via a different method other than this. This doesn't actually manage the account from that perspective. We can then choose password complexity. So I think there's a caveat around, there isn't. The default is the one with special characters in it, the most complex, and so that's what we'll choose. There really would be no good reason to choose anything other than that. And I believe I've read something in the documentation where that's the only one supported or something like that. Probably not a good time to there you go. So that's to do with backward compatibility. So it does support settings 1, 2, and 3, but only because the old version could have that set as well. So Microsoft recommend that you all set it to 4 for obvious reasons, which is the one that includes special characters. Then we can use the password length, and it's set to 14 by default, but can go from 1 to 64. Not 1, I assume not 1, 8 to 64. 14 is quite a long password, especially if you're telling it to someone over the phone. That's something that you might want to consider when you're configuring this, that often when you do need to give a password to someone, you typically might be on a call with them if you're in a support situation. And if it's large letters, small letters, numbers, and special characters, and you're on the phone, having it 64 characters is probably not a good idea. So if we assume it's 14, and then we get to choose the post authentication actions, we have a reset password upon when the grace period expires, which we'll configure in a moment. It will reset the password, or it can reset the password and log off, or it can reset the password and reboot. Those things I mentioned earlier on. Let's say we choose that and then choose the number of hours with a 1 being the minimum, 0 turning the whole feature off, and a maximum of no maximum. Oh, 24. Okay, good. So yeah, that seems like a reasonable thing to be able to do. So I'm glad that they've stuck that in there. So once you've created this, again, it's a standard Intune policy that we're deploying here. So you can use scope tags, you can use assignments, you can deploy this to your endpoints. And just like a good demo person, I have deployed one to my endpoints, which I think I've configured in exactly the same way. Oh, I went for 32. And it's set to reset and log off with a 1 hour delay. Okay, so let's take a look at this from a client side. Client side, how would that work? Not the client side, from the devices side. So if we go to this policy and okay, so reporting isn't in here. We can determine the password for a device by going to devices and then all devices and then finding the device itself. So these are the two that are existing in my environment right now. We choose client 3. There's a new button down here called local admin password. You choose that. And funnily enough, it tells you the local admin password. You have to click show a few times. So you'd think if you clicked on show local admin password, the next thing you would see is the local admin password, but that's not the case. You see something else telling you that if you click show, you can see the local admin password, and there it is. And a handy copy button, so you can copy that. So if I was to take that, you can see when it was set and when it will last be set. This is obviously in American because that's the 4th of April. No, that's the 23rd of April, and that's the 23rd of May. And if I was to take that to client 3 and log in, I can then hopefully show what happened when I use this, but that's going very, very slow. If I choose run as administrator and use the username that I definitely remembered, I think it's that, and then just tap that clipboard text, which is hopefully the password. There we go, and choose yes. That should obviously not work. Let me remember what the username was. Oh, account name administrator. I don't think that's true, but it could be. I've been wrong before, literally a few seconds ago, but let's try it. Clipboard type yes. Yeah, it was true. Very good. So that has run that application as administrator. Obviously, you saw the inverse of that when it didn't work because it got the password wrong. Though it wouldn't have run it as administrator in that case. So that helps with that problem. Now, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to show on that. Although no, actually there is more things you can do. If we go into the overview tab on this, you can see we've got additional options here around rotating the local admin password. So if you wanted to rotate the local admin password for this device, you could using that button, and it seems to happen immediately, but it doesn't seem to happen to report that it works immediately. So for example, if I choose rotate,
Can you
and then
rotate the password through policy? So if somebody uses the
through
password, if somebody uses the password, it changes it once it's been used.
it does, yes. Yeah, it does. Which I believe, I can't remember what I set it to, but it definitely rotates the password, no matter which one you've set it to. And endpoint security, account protection, cloud lapse, config, it will reset the password on a post authentication action after an hour. So I'm not going to hold you all on here for an hour to see that happens. To be fair, I haven't actually verified that myself, so I wouldn't want to hold you all to see it fail. But like I say, all of these features have been tested very, very well and do, according to the portal I've just seen there, it's now in GA. So yes, that's that. Yeah. Any questions on Windows Labs?
You know that, Dean, you were copying the password so you could see the password. It was visible for you. Does it have the
Yeah.
capability to inject the password for a user that without showing them the password, if they authorize you use it?
No, that would be Endpoint Privilege Manager. I think that would be the feature, the other feature that you would use to do that kind of silent elevation for a user that needs it. I mean, these features are kind of very similar to each other in end result. You get to elevate an application to admin. How they're achieved is different. As I mentioned, this Windows Labs feature is free and built into Windows now. So if you have a valid license for Windows, then you are able to use this. It doesn't even require Azure AD Premium. It's Azure AD free is perfectly okay. It doesn't need Intune. Intune's just a very good way to configure it and very simple way to configure it. So you can just use GPO or any other MDM that you've got to use this tool. Whereas touching on licensing, endpoint privilege management does need licensing. And so that's probably a good time with the couple of minutes I've got left to talk about that. If we head over to, click around, if we head over to tenant admin, and choose Intune add-ons, you'll see that we have some Intune add-ons. Now, I don't know if any of you have been following the announcement around Intune add-ons, but essentially Intune now has features that are bolt-ons to Intune that you have to buy separately. That started quite a few months ago with something called Remote Help, which was $3 per user per month, regardless of whether you were the helper or the helpee. So every user that needed to be able to help or be helped was required to pay $3 per user per month, and that, from a response perspective from everyone in the community, and I'm sure organizations as well, that didn't get a great response because that's quite expensive compared to other tools. Now, when you look at what they were planning to do, really was to bundle Remote Help in with a load of other features and allow you to buy them separately for a reasonable cost, $3 per user per month, for example, but bundle them in for a much lower cost if you buy all the features together, much like they do with the M365 SKUs. So, for example, they've got the Microsoft Intune suite, and right now that includes Remote Help and Intune Plan 2. Intune Plan 2 is essentially Intune Plan 1 with some extra features. And if we look at what features are in Intune Plan 2, we can click that button and see what they are. That is Microsoft Tunnel for mobile application management, support for specialty devices. That's all that's in that. And then you've got Remote Help. So if you were to buy the Intune suite, you get those two things, which again, on their own, even as a bundle, I don't think they're worth the price of Intune suite right now, which list price is $10 per user per month. So that feels still quite a lot of money for the two or three features that are available right now, but they are building more features to go into that suite very rapidly. They're already in private and some in public preview. So that's good to know. And I think the suite is eventually going to be very powerful and definitely worth the money if it stays at $10 per user per month. So if we look at EPM, at the bottom there, it says it's available for trial or purchase because it's now out of public preview, so you can buy it. And I can go and buy it through this, or I can get a 90-day trial for 250 users. I don't actually know how much it costs, to be fair. Hopefully it doesn't show my address. £2.50, so $3 per user per month. And for endpoint privilege management, I think that might be worth it, given what the features you get with it. And so the point is that all of these features will be built into the Intune suite from now on. So yeah, you have to buy that. And the reason for that, I think, is becoming more clear to organizations and people, because these features are much more rich than you would get if Intune was to just release a a new button on their interface. These are different products, new products, more well developed. I know from speaking to people at the summit last week, they've spent years developing endpoint privilege management and Windows Labs to get it to the state it's in right now. So it is actually worth quite a lot of money when you think of it that way. Does that answer all your licensing questions there, John? Sure it does. Okay, good. Any other questions? You're welcome. Yeah, and Andrew just saying that Microsoft are all about speaking to your licensing partner, and then obviously I was quoting the list prices there, so that's probably not what most people are paying, because if you are a big enough organization, or if you just speak to your licensing partner, you can normally get a discount. Certainly don't jump into buying 10,000 licenses from the portal. I'm sure Microsoft would love you, but that's probably not a good idea. Do speak to a licensing partner or your account manager if you're big enough. David, as someone who suffers through the inbox of requests in other EPM tool, which is quite manual, I'm looking forward to EPM. Yeah, indeed. I think it is becoming a really incredible feature, and I mentioned in the video, I think it's a game changer for MDM as a whole, endpoint management as a whole, because it just can fully change how we use devices, especially when you look at what else they can do when essentially they're detecting applications being launched successfully for this feature, and they're running rules based on that. Think of what you can do if you were to be able to get into the back end of that and really develop features off the back of what's being done there. I don't want to go into too much detail because I might say something I shouldn't, but there is work coming. There is work ongoing for new features that are based on the technology they've developed to do this. So it should be quite good to see. Okay, I think that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Dean, as always. Pleasure to have you, and thank you for taking time out, mate, on your evening to join us.